I thought I'd better have a word with a few people in the voluntary sector in preparation for this. So before I came down, I talked to the President of Age Concern Newcastle, and the Vice President of the Council of Voluntary Service, President of Newcastle Choral Society, and the Vice President of the Community Foundation. I was actually talking to myself, because I actually hold all those positions. And the point of that is that there are many of us in local government who are engaged in one way or another with the well, the third sector is the phrase. I think we need to deconstruct that a bit, because I've often argued in those rather turgid meetings of the compact between the voluntary sector and the government, in which local government is a sort of participant, that there's no such thing as a kind of seamless third sector with all the organisations being identical. They're not. And they range from really what are essentially highly professional organisations like, say, Bernardo's or a housing association, to a very small community group, the credit union or the tenants association or whatever it might be. I think today we're really focusing on that voluntary element rather than the professional organisation, although some degree of professional organisation, of course, is required in order to harness very often the services and the skills of the volunteers. But looking generally at the volunteering, it does strike me that there are essentially two areas of discussion. One is and role. One is delivery of service of one kind or another, and the other relates to issues of governance, where volunteers are involved in managing, governing, advising, rather than actually delivering service. Now, there are constraints that seem to me that apply to both categories, and some of them have already been touched on. But time, of course, is a major constraint, and for people in work in particular. And I wonder whether we shouldn't be encouraging employers to provide time off for volunteering with accredited organisations in the way that they're supposed to do for people who serve in local government or magistrates. Now, it's not all that effective in those areas, but I think this is something that we could certainly be looking at. There's also, of course, the question of the financial aspect, both for the individual and here, although there have been some improvements, I still think there may be problems with the interrelation of the benefits system, for example, and people who are not out of work but wanting to volunteer. And that perhaps should be reviewed further. On the other side of the issue, there is the question of whether organisations get sufficient core funding to manage and support volunteers, and that I think has to be part of the kind of local compact arrangement between councils and their voluntary and community groups. Of course, also there's the need to ensure that those who are volunteering have the relevant skills and are supported in acquiring and keeping up to date those skills, which again implies a degree of core funding. And I think also the need to allow them the opportunity to learn from each other. Peer review is now well embedded in local government. It's not yet much embedded in the voluntary and community sector, even on the sort of professional organisation side, and I guess still less so at the level of groups in the local community. And although it would take some organisation to get going, I do think it would be helpful for people to see how colleagues in another part of the city or county carry out their business, or a different type of organisation. Just that sharing of experience and looking at what other people do and communicating what you do to them actually can reinforce the skill base and the capacity. But I do very strongly agree with what Justin was saying about reducing the bureaucracy. I think this, to be frank, the latest proposals around children strike me as distinctly overeating the pudding, and indeed sending quite a difficult message about volunteering. You're kind of almost suspect of something before you've even started. I think that's a very bad message to send. And I think we need to be more robust, certainly not taking unnecessary risks, but not overloading the bureaucracy if we're going to encourage people to play a full role. And the other aspect, just on those who give their time and energy to service of this kind, is that they're entitled to some recognition. I happen to sit on the local honours services, local services honours committee rather, at the ceremonial office in Whitehall there, and we see loads of people coming forward for MBEs and so on, and that's fine, but it's national. I would like to see us have a much more widespread system of recognising people locally my own authorities are going to do this, at my suggestion there are other places, we have citizens award schemes and so on. We need to celebrate what people are doing. We need to give people, and indeed organisations, recognition for the contribution they're making to society. But I want to turn, if I may, now to what I call the governance issues, because I think this is something that perhaps we haven't developed sufficiently. There are a range of people who serve on a range of bodies, whether it's school governing bodies, hospital trusts, they serve as magistrates, a wide range of organisations of that kind. And they get appointed in one way or another, but essentially this is voluntary activity. And very often, again, that's unsupported. And even if it is supported, it's supported pretty marginally. So I had recently a meeting with chairs of governors of schools in my ward, and there is a governors association in Newcastle, and we organised that some years ago. I understand that the present administration in Newcastle, which is the Lib Dem administration, is actually charging governors for the use of a room in our civic centre for governors association meetings. Now again, that seems to be sent an awfully bad message, and it's entirely wrong. We should be welcoming them and giving them that kind of support. But we also need to support people in the role that, first of all, to get to the point where they want to be governors or magistrates or whatever. And that means some outreach work. Again, perhaps drawing on the experience of existing volunteers, but perhaps also with the backup from the local council. And in particular, we need to ensure that there are volunteers on structures like local strategic partnerships, where council sits down with a range of its local social partners to determine the plan for the local community. Too often, the people that are there, who are not from the statutory services, are representing the kind of institutional voluntary community sector, and they're not very often volunteers who come from the ground and from delivery. And I think we need to strengthen the presence of those people. And also we need to encourage people to get involved in council's scrutiny processes. This is a development process in local government. In Newcastle, when it started off, we got 4 people from the voluntary community sector on our health and wellbeing scrutiny panel, and they're still there. We have some on the education panel, not on the others. I think as a matter of course we should be getting people onto these panels from outside the council and with experience of life and difficulties on the ground. And equally, I think the council itself should be scrutinising how it relates to the voluntary community sector and how the process of supporting volunteering in the community goes. So this would be part of council's own internal scrutiny process. And of course, in doing that, we should be inviting people from the sector to contribute their views. Above all, I think we need to facilitate the drawing together of people across the sector. Many councils of voluntary service do this, some more effectively than others, but that collective support for volunteering, I think, has to be reflected in not an over-elaborate organisational structure, but in some kind of structure which has the resource to support people collectively as well as individually in both the governance and delivery aspects. So I think there's quite a lot to be done here, and I think there's a willingness in local government to do it in many areas. Not, however, in all. There is a danger, and people have already alluded to it, of an incoming Conservative government treating the third sector as an easy, soft option in terms of getting stuff done. And if you look at, as we were hearing in the conference hall today, the record of some new Tory councils, the outriders of new conservatism in Hammersmith and Fulham, places like that, one of the first things they do, actually, is cut support to voluntary organisations, and in particular Hammersmith and Fulham is making its reputation on doing precisely that. So that is a real concern, which we may have to face after next May. I certainly hope we don't, and all of us down here at the conference will be trying to ensure that that doesn't happen. But it is a real risk, and if by any chance we end up with a different government next May, I hope that the sector will argue its case very forcefully against that kind of change, which would be really very damaging to the interests of society as a whole and those who have so much to contribute as volunteers.